My name is Michael Kramer. I know I'm maybe dressed like a paid lobbyist, but I'm not. I'm a retired lawyer, a concerned citizen, a Rhode Island voter, and a volunteer for the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. I'm also an honorably discharged officer in the United States Army, which is where I learned to disassemble, assemble, and fire the M16. And of course qualified with that weapon. And I'm familiar with that weapon. The AR-15, which has been referred to earlier, is the same weapon. The only difference from the one that I used in the service is that I could shoot it on burst or on automatic, where the AR-15 cannot. But actually, the United States Army, since the 1980s, has trained its soldiers to fire on semi-automatic, and in fact, conventional soldiers were only given a semi-automatic version of this weapon because semi-automatic, the AR-15 or the M16, is more accurate and more deadly. I'm here in support, obviously, of the Bill 2493, the assault weapons ban. The argument that I've heard from this table is that we don't know what an assault weapon is. Well, that's a red herring. We do know what an assault weapon is. The 1994 Federal Act defined it. The bill that you have before you specifically defines what an assault weapon is. An assault weapon is not an ordinary pistol or an ordinary shotgun or an ordinary rifle. The bill was designed and written to specify exactly what is an assault weapon. And it gives examples of what is included as an assault weapon, including the AR-15, which is the most popular weapon, which was banned in 1994. And the
Senator Archambault.
I'm just going to jump in for 1 second. I've read the bill and I've looked at the plethora of guns that are included in the assault weapon definition. And I'm an attorney by trade, and I'm not exactly unskilled at reading detailed papers or bills. And I'm not clear on what an assault weapon is. So you can see it crystal clearly from this bill. And
I read the bill and I understand what the bill is.
God bless you, because some of my colleagues I've talked to, and myself included, and many of them actually, are unclear on what it says. But you can go ahead and you testify.
Well, Senator, if you think a more specific definition is required, I certainly wouldn't object. I'm not a draftsman of bills.
Yeah, I just continue with your testimony. I'm saying it objectively. I just really, from looking at the bill, I'm not clear on what it is. There's a lot of guns that are included in that, and so it becomes a little confusing as to how you clearly define. I know you referenced the Federal Act, but I just want to throw that out there that some of us, even reading this stuff regularly, grapple with how you define it. But you go ahead.
Well, the most popular assault weapon, if you will, is the AR-15. Assault weapons like that are of no value to hunters. Your deer or your prey would be worthless to you if you shot it. The only hunting you can really do with a weapon like that is hunting people. And this is a weapon that's excellent for that purpose. One of the speakers said that the amount of damage can be done by this weapon is overstated. Today's New York Times has an article, which I commend to you, about the damage done to people who've been shot with the AR-15. The article talks about it specifically, and there are interviews with maybe a dozen doctors, some of whom were in the military, some of whom have treated victims of mass shootings, describing the actual damage done to a human being when shot with a weapon like the AR-15. The AR-15 and weapons like it are designed to kill as many people as possible, as efficiently as possible, and they're very good at it. The shooter in Aurora, who killed 15 people, did it with an AR-15. The shooter in Newtown, who killed 27 people, did it with an AR-15. The San Bernardino killer killed 14 people with an AR-15. The Las Vegas shooter killed 58 people with an AR-15. In Sutherland Springs, Texas, 26 people were killed by a killer with that weapon. And of course, last month in Parkland, 17 people died, victims of someone shooting an AR-15, and the weapon was doing what it was designed to do, which is to be deadly to people. Now, after each and every one of these mass shootings, elected officials like yourselves expressed and offer their thoughts and prayers to the victims and to the victims' families. But in Connecticut, after the Newtown shooting, the state legislature did more than offer thoughts and prayers. The state legislature did something concrete. They banned assault weapons in Connecticut, joining New York, Massachusetts, and other states. It's time for our General Assembly to do the same thing before something happens here. If you saw the Providence Journal this morning, it was reported that a neutral poll indicated that 60% of Rhode Islanders favor an assault weapons ban. That's your constituents. If we fail to enact this ban, and I mean the Senate and those of us whom you represent, then we will be complicit if this happens again. Now, one question that people have raised is, what about the Second Amendment? How does this comport with the Second Amendment? And Senator Jabbar correctly pointed out that the Heller decision of the Supreme Court was the first decision which talked about individual rights to own guns. I commend you to read Heller. The Heller decision held that individuals have the right to have a pistol at home for self-protection. That's the extent of the Heller holding. And in that holding, Justice Scalia, no friend of gun control, wrote, again, as the senator indicated, like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. The right is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. And then Justice Scalia, writing for the majority, went on to detail a number of restrictions which are obviously permissible under the Second Amendment, keeping firearms away from felons, from the mentally ill. And contrary to what one of the lobbyist for the indicated, Justice Scalia made it clear that under the Second Amendment, the use and carrying of guns in schools could be banned, contrary to what was said earlier. I believe, and I think Rhode Islanders believe, that it's time to act. The Second Amendment is no bar to reasonable restrictions on the ownership of guns. Now, I've also heard that the 1994 automatic weapons ban assault weapons ban didn't stop crime. Well, most crimes aren't committed with an assault weapon. This isn't a crime bill. This isn't a bill designed to reduce crime where I live or where you live. It's a bill that's designed to make it harder for ordinary citizens to own weapons which can be used to kill many people at a time. If Florida had had this law in effect, then Nicholas Cruz, who bought the assault weapon that killed 17 people in Parkland, couldn't have bought his weapon. Could he have hurt people in other ways, with a handgun or with a knife? Sure, he could have, but he couldn't have killed 17 people as quickly as he did. Now, what about assault weapons that are already in private hands? This bill does not take those away. This bill grandfathers people in Rhode Island who currently lawfully own assault weapons. Now, in a perfect world, I can imagine that those would have to be turned in, which is what was done successfully in Australia. But in a perfect world, that would be the case. But this is not a perfect world, and I think we're all well aware that a bill which required turning in existing assault weapons would not have much of a chance of passage in the House or in the Senate. We shouldn't let the perfect, which is the elimination of all assault weapons, stand in the way or be the enemy of the good, which is to prevent more assault weapons from proliferating in our state. The 1994 assault weapon ban did its job. The number of assault weapons that were sold during that period of time went down dramatically. And in 2004, when the assault weapons ban expired, sales increased greatly. The goal of this bill is not to stop crime. The goal of this bill is to make it harder for individuals to obtain weapons which are military weapons intended to kill people. No one needs an assault weapon at home for home protection. If I have a handgun or a rifle or a shotgun, I'm adequately protected if someone tries to break into my home if I'm afraid of that. Now, I suppose if the 82nd Airborne came at my house, that might be a different story, but that's not a likely scenario. You know, I'd like to quote Edward Stack, who puts this issue in a fairly simple and important way. Mr. Stack, I didn't know this, but Mr. Stack is the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods. And Mr. Stack was explaining why his company, under his leadership, was no longer going to sell assault weapons. And he made a profit, just like the gun manufacturers do in manufacturing it. Dick's Sporting Goods sold these weapons en masse. What he said was, we don't want to be part of a mass shooting. I don't think I want to be part of a mass shooting. I don't think people in Rhode Island do. And if we can stop the proliferation of these weapons, we will make some progress in doing that. I urge this committee to authorize this bill to come to the Senate floor for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Jabbour. I'm sorry, sir.
Or would you consider a question from the floor that is pertinent to what is
No,
presented?
no, sir. Unfortunately, this isn't, there are still hundreds of people here that are going to testify, but if there's something you'd like to submit by email or otherwise, you can feel free to do so.
It's just that-
Thank you. Sir, we gave you a chance, so other people who I'm sure didn't agree with you sat quietly. So Senator Jabbour.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Kramer, thank you for your testimony. It's obviously you're familiar with the Heller case. So the one thing that I think that Judge Scalia might say about the Rhode Island legislation to try to pass any constitutional challenge to it would be, I think what we're trying to do here is to prevent access to guns, if I could use the term. We're trying to prevent access to guns in the wrong, putting them in the wrong hands of individuals who are not rational, capable, and to handle that gun as required by law. We've heard a lot of testimony this evening from individuals who appear to be very rational, responsible, and prudent owners of weapons. And so I think the legislation here is not designed to prevent them from owning the guns that are legal. But I think you and I agree on one thing, that the gun that we're talking about, and you described it to the T, there's a common element there. For each and every situation that has happened in America that has involved mass shooting, you correctly identified what was the weapon of choice. And it was a weapon of choice for a reason. It was because someone with a very distorted mind, with evil intentions, decided, what could I get my hands on that could do the most damage? It was almost like when you watch one of these Schwarzenegger movies and you see him strap on what might be the most powerful weapon. And that's what happened in all of these cases. It's not as extreme as that, but look for the gun that can do the most damage. So think about the parents that had to look at those children that were destroyed just like an animal would have been destroyed when hit by that type of a gun. The lasting impression of that. So I think it is incumbent on the members of this body, and I'm hoping that we as a whole body, not just the Senate, but when the bills pass one chamber, that when they go to the next chamber, that chamber recognizes the importance of the legislation and we act in a very cooperative manner. That has not always been the way things are done here. But on this issue, I think the public has a demand that both chambers have to act. But your insight is, I would take that to the floor when the bill and cite many of your comments, because I think members of the Senate who don't understand the law, you've done a great job of describing it. Thank you.